Now that Kingdom Come Deliverance 2's release is upon us, we still have room for one more analysis video before getting our hands on it. This time, we're going to examine the third developer livestream demo as conducted by Sir Tobi, Warhorse Studios' PR manager and the lead designer, Prokop Jirsa. Within their 2-hour-long coverage, there are a lot of interesting observations surrounding combat, such as those related to melee fighting we've discussed before, as well as several notable skill modifications, including ones pertaining to warfare and horsemanship, which by extension also reveals a subtle but essential difference in the implementation of Horse Tack. If you'd like to check out the recording of today's topic, I left its link down in the description, alongside everything else that will be shown here. Okay, let's do this. One of the highlights during their stream was when Sir Tobi tried to do a master strike against this bandit, because it perfectly illustrates just how difficult pulling them off will be. In the previous video, I suggested that its challenge mainly comes from 2 pointers, if we fail to recognize a feint and counterattack too late, which is what happened here. In preparation for it, he positions Henry's weapon on the right, opposite to where his enemy is holding theirs. But as this brigand prepares to attack, he quickly switched sides. In this case, Sir Tobi saw the feint and was able to transfer his weapon accordingly. But because Henry's counterattack was released when the foe's weapon was already about to connect, the MS didn't bite, and the bandit's slash landed first. Now the big question is, how late into the counterattack would fall within the Master Strike window? In a previous presentation, one of my assumptions is that Master Strikes could be part of the warfare skill, but there's no mention of it in the description, nor is there an icon within its perks. So it must be integrated into a weapon skill instead, specifically swords, because apparently it's the only type we could use for doing such moves. We can also see here that Henry's sword skill level is at 15, which is halfway from its maximum value of 30. So there's still a potential that the MS window might expand a little bit more as he gains experience, and the outcome of this exchange could have been different if that were the case. Since the combat system has been revamped so that it's now theoretically possible to prevent Henry from getting hit by a master strike, utilizing basic methods of fighting should be sufficient while we train Henry's skills. Just like in KCD1, both attack speed and the damage incurred to our weapon during combat are covered by the warfare skill. However, its description also states that foes would find it more difficult to read our intentions and parry attacks, which most likely refers to feints and perfect blocks. If that's the case, then it's a very curious trade-off where, on one hand, this specific skill has been buffed due to the inclusion of feints, and at the same time, this also means it's been slightly nerfed, due to the fact that warfare affected our chances of landing hits in the first game, but now it only decreases a foe's tendency to perfect block attacks. It's not too bad, however. By lessening an opponent's ability to parry blows, it would result in Henry being able to finish combos more often, because simply holding down the defend button will not stop chain strikes. Perfect blocks are quite intriguing actually. If we scan the combat tab's contents, you'll notice that the defense panel, where PB used to be assigned, is gone. Upon referring back to its function, one aspect this skill directly influences is the window allotment for perfect blocks. But because it's been merged into warfare, and there's no mention of it both in the skill and perk descriptions, I assume the timing of a PB is fixed from the beginning. This is why throughout the gameplay demos we've seen, regardless of whether Sir Tobi used a new save file or one that's been modified with maxed out stats, the green shield icon's appearance behavior did not change. The perceivable effects of relocated perks, however, is not isolated to it, because there's another one demonstrated a couple of times during the stream. We'll talk about it next. Just like perfect blocks, dodging is also a perk that's been transferred from another place, And because its method is different to how it was in the first game, I'm uncertain as to what role agility will play with this move. Regardless, one of the things I think we should keep an eye on is its Invincibility Frames, which Sir Tobi demonstrated 3 times during Henry's practice fight against Sir Semin. On his first attempt, it's very clear that he dodged too early, whereas his second and third tries were timed just right. So from these examples, a couple of things can be observed. First off, it's quite fascinating how the dodge animation is very similar to how it's performed in KCD1, where the character would duck as they step sideways. Judging by how Sir Semin's attacks connected and missed, it's most likely that the iframes are positioned somewhere in the middle of its animation, perhaps starting from the lowest point of the head weave and fans outwards. So if it turns out that the agility stats description says something about making dodging easier as Henry's score gets higher, I assume this window is what's most likely being referred to. In the previous presentation, I also had a hunch that attacks from the side of an enemy after dodging is always guaranteed to connect. But as we can see here, this smash from above got perfect blocked. Interestingly enough, Sir Tobi's third attempt, which appears to have been defended against, was actually a hit, because there was no wooden impact sound from both weapons, and we can clearly hear Sir Semin's chainmail rattle. Given this specific situation, I do wonder if the chances of landing a hit might be better when our counterattack comes from the enemy's flank. For example, if Henry's opponent is facing to the left after dodging, would it be best if our response comes from the right side? It's technically a blind spot we might be able to leverage, so this is something we'll have to test out. Given the enthusiasm surrounding this topic, I do agree with a viewer who left a comment stating that most of the fight footages focused on one-on-one duels, but how the melee combat system would adapt in taking on multiple enemies is uncertain. This is because the only full examples we have of it can be found within the official gameplay showcase and second stream. Those ones shared through the preview videos are a collection of short clips, which are inadequate to make a proper assessment, while the skirmish against bandits in this third live demo is technically a group fight, so it doesn't count. Nevertheless, my observations about this kind of armed encounter remains the same from when we first talked about it. Instead of enemies having an inclination to simultaneously charge Henry in a reckless manner, they will now carefully try to encircle him, which is an advantage for the player. But at the same time, locking on to a single target before fighting is still a requirement and might cause some issues. However, there is a warfare perk called Unbreakable, which increases Henry's stamina regeneration by 20% if outnumbered. And what makes this very intriguing is that there's another one named Hardened Veteran, which simply boosts his energy recovery by 10% during combat. So if it turns out that these two abilities stack, it would greatly enhance our character's survivability. On top of that, Against All Odds perk, which gives a bonus to strength, agility, and warfare when engaging multiple foes, has been carried over to KCD2, although it's been slightly weakened, because it used to give off a 20% stat boost. Now it only provides a solid +2. Whether Henry is participating in a fight or doing some other activity, I think it's good for us players to be aware of these intricacies running under the hood. And thankfully, there's a lot more of them shown during the stream. In the course of my examination, I came across a couple of combat-related tidbits, such as the time it takes for Henry to draw his short sword, which is 1 second, and swapping to a mace from here requires a 2-second animation. Meanwhile, drinking potions equipped on the quick slot bag means having to hold down the action button for a similar amount. But the one that intrigued me the most has something to do with Bane Potion, which, as you're most likely aware, is a very destructive concoction in KCD1 and can give us an edge in battle. You see, there seems to be a disparity as to how this poison changed. On one hand, we have Mr. Jirsa, who said that they've been made more powerful, but on the other, Its recipe annotation also states that it's mainly designed for lacing food than being wiped on a weapon, which seems to suggest that its potency is diminished if used in armed combat. I think the reason behind this conflicting information comes from its three varieties, where the weak and standard ones are indeed great for sabotaging stews, but for coating our weapons, the strong mix is probably the best, since it drains health at an accelerated pace. The weapons themselves also have two attributes whose functions are still to be determined. First is something new called a blood percentage, which I assume is a numerical representation of how much a certain weapon is caked with that bodily fluid, as opposed to simply having a red splash icon. The higher that number is, the more intimidating Henry looks, in theory. Next is Charisma, a weapon trait present in KCD1 but was not implemented as far as I know. I think the idea behind this is that NPCs will perceive our character differently depending on the type and quality of weapon he's got equipped. So for example, his charisma score should be higher if he's carrying an expensive longsword as opposed to a humble bludgeon. But as we can see here, it's not doing anything, even though their inherent stats are very far apart. Its inclusion in KCD2 raises the chances of such a feature to be included, but then again, there was no mention in the charisma note about weapons being a factor within its calculation. Apart from weapon stats, unarmed fighting also has a bit of mystery going on as well, because when Henry got into a scuffle with Yurko, he threw palm strikes instead of the established hooks. After reviewing all footages that show a fistfight, this is the first time such kind of normal attack was shown, and Henry only does a similar move after winning a clinch. Even the way his opponent avoided punches through bobbing instead of doing a sidestep is something novel to the IP. So I'm not sure if this is an unlockable perk for brawling or if it's a move exclusive to NPCs. Outside of combat, there were also a number of revelations pertaining to different things. One of them has something to do with the prices of items, where Mr. Jirsa said that charisma now affects it. This is a curious alteration because in the first game, as we've covered in a video about its economy, the only parameter which directly influences an object's value is Henry's reputation, while charisma stretches a trader's patience while haggling. So perhaps this is what he meant. Meanwhile, the craftsmanship skills note reveals that the equipment quality Henry will be able to forge and/or repair will depend on its level. And an immediate question which came to mind is, how does the game divide them per rank? My best guess is that the Roman numeral tag affixed to every piece of gear is the most likely identifier for segregation. In relation to this, Mr. Jirsa at the beginning of their stream briefly mentioned something about Henry being able to wash his clothes, but got cut short. However, the clues for this are scattered everywhere. First off, two of the spots for doing such side activity were shown, and a German merchant Henry interacted with on the halfway point of their demo have soap available for sale. Not to mention laundry being explicitly described in the last line of craftsmanship's annotation. So yes, it's safe to assume that he will no longer have to solely rely on the services of a bathhouse to clean up this recurring issue. Clothing, weapons, and armor are not the only things that could get dirty in KCD2 though, because according to this menu, horses will now also need a wash from time to time. Now that we have this subtopic covered, it's time to discuss some of the things I noticed about horsemanship. There seems to be a trend when it comes to perks, where some of them from the first game have been melded within a skill instead. In the case of horsemanship, its capabilities have been carried over from KCD1. The amount of stamina consumed while galloping is still affected by it, not to mention helping our horse become less skittish in battle. The only difference is that it will now also influence how hard for enemies to throw Henry off his saddle, which used to be a perk called Strong Thighs. Now when it comes to Pebbles, our character's canonical horse, it seems like we'll be able to retrieve her very early in the game, because the save file Sir Tobi used indicate that this is within 4 hours of a playthrough, assuming the profile for this demo was not modified in some way. We're very much aware that she isn't the fastest and strongest available, but I also recall when Mr. Jirsa said in their second stream that it's possible to make her stronger. Since I haven't found any evidence of an upgrade mechanic outside of Horse Tack, we're going to focus on that method, which has a number of changes. In KCD1, the purpose of each piece of gear is very straightforward. The bridle improves courage, a saddle with bags increases capacity, then horseshoes enhance speed, while a chanfron and caparison adds to defense. But according to their descriptions, as Sir Tobi went through available ones for sale, their functions have been switched around, with exception to saddles. A bridle will now boost a horse's stamina and speed, while courage has been moved over to caparisons. In addition, harnesses are now available, which also affects courage among others. Meanwhile, horseshoes will improve our horse's defense, and there's a hint that it will still increase their speed depending on the quality equipped. As for chanfrons, their capabilities have not been revealed in the video, but at least we have proof that they're still present for the sequel. Upon examining the table, one reason I could think of for such a reshuffle is to compel players in utilizing all types of gear, because in the first game, equipment such as caparisons, which bolster our horse's defense at the expense of speed, are considered optional, since we're constantly on the move during mounted combat. But now that a very important stat like courage has been transferred within them, as well as to harnesses, utilizing such kits will be a must, while having to deal with their negative effects on speed, carrying capacity, and stamina. When combined with the fact that there are now 3 types of horses which tend to favor certain qualities, finding the right balance will now take some careful consideration. This concludes our KCD2 pre-release examination series. If you've played the first game, I assume adapting to its sequel will be a breeze, because out of all the things we checked out over the course of several videos, it's clear that this game is very close to the debut title, except every aspect within has been improved in some way. And now that we'll finally experience it ourselves, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more for us worth talking about.